With all the hype circulating Gen 4 and how it may come out soon, there's been a lot of talk about how Tyranitar may be power creeped down a bit by other Dark-Type Pokemon. This not only includes the legendary slash mythic Pokemon Darkrai, but also includes Gen 4 evolution Pokemon such as Honchkrow and Weavile. There's been some chatter on the GamePress team about how Honchkrow and Weavile may influence Tyranitar's current viability as a Stardust investment, so I decided to take an extra special look into it by simulating it in a Confusion Shadow Ball Mewtwo raid. Similarly, there's been some talk about how Yanmega, a Bug-type Pokemon, could become the new best Bug-type Pokemon in Gen 4 given its typing and its bulk and the movesets that it has access to. So I decided to take a look in that as well, comparing some Pokemon to a Confusion Focus Blast Mewtwo raid. So this is a clip from my livestream SwagTips where I go over all that data. Hope you like it. Alright, so these are Mewtwo counters versus Shadow Ball. It's the Confusion Shadow Ball Mewtwo raid, and I went with the Shadow Ball moveset because it's the more aggressive kind of raid. Like the Psychic one, obviously easier, but if we want to have a good Mewtwo counter, we may as well be putting it up against the hardest situation, right? So I decided to graph out Tyranitar, Darkrai. I also threw in Porygon Z, which I'll talk about in a little bit. I got Weavile and Honchkrow. Alolan Muck makes its appearance. And any other new ones? Nah, no other new ones. This is Tyranitar level 25, which is its breakpoint with Great Friendship. When I was going into this, I didn't initially want to look at Darkrai. I actually wasn't even thinking about Darkrai. I was thinking more about Honchkrow and Weavile, because from what the data was suggesting, if they get their optimal movesets, they could be power creeping on Tyranitar's DPS. You don't really see that with Weavile. I used, I believe, Feint Attack with Foul Play on the Weavile here. Just sort of like a reasonable optimal moveset. It could get Sucker Punch, which would be slightly better. It might nudge it more towards Tyranitar's DPS, but if you're able to visualize with an imaginary line, like all the way, this is tankiness. The total damage output, basically. If you can imagine over here, Tyranitar is still ahead of what I think Weavile's most reasonable moveset will be. Yeah, Sucker Punch might bring it up a little bit more, but it'd be like on par, if not behind Tyranitar. And it does look like with Honchkrow's optimal moveset, like eyeballing it here, Honchkrow just seems to be barely beating out Tyranitar's DPS in practice against this Shadow Ball moveset. So I'm not terribly convinced that Tyranitar is getting power crept super hard here, because Tyranitar isn't some legendary Pokemon that you can only come across every now and then. I mean, kind of. It's still a raid boss though, and we've had a community day for it, so I still feel comfortable advocating people powering up multiples of Tyranitars because it's just ridiculously powerful and good. And Tyranitar is still going to be super good against all the different Psychic type raids that are going to come in Gen 4. So I still feel like Tyranitar is a pretty safe investment. Honchkrow might have slightly higher DPS in practice though, which is kind of interesting. And I imagine in raids or encounters that aren't as intense as Confusion Shadow Ball Mewtwo, it might show even better in that respect, where it's like, yeah, Honchkrow's like the high DPS option, where Tyranitar is like the very good DPS, extremely bulky option. But in that respect, I don't feel like Tyranitar is going anywhere when you're comparing it to these non-legendary Pokemon. But then I remember Darkrai exists, right? So I also ran Darkrai. It definitely looks like it's standing tall compared to Tyranitar. Definitely not as tanky as Tyranitar, but that DPS is pretty sick. Now, this is with Foul Play, and I went with Sucker Punch for the fast move. So Sucker Punch and Foul Play are both really good Dark-type attacks. So if it lost one or the other, it would probably start sinking closer to 22. I'm pretty sure if it lost Foul Play, it would definitely drop to like 22, because Foul Play is just ridiculously good. But even then, it would still have higher DPS than Tyranitar, and its tankiness would be at such a level where it's like not that big of a deal, you know, compared to something like Honchkrow, where it's much further behind. Darkrai could offer some serious competition for Tyranitar, but they could shaft Darkrai's move pool somehow. That could happen. We don't have any Game Master information on them yet, but yeah, if you haven't maxed out 6 Tyranitars yet, maybe only max out 3 or 4 and see what happens with Darkrai's Game Master. And we can make a couple more assumptions from there. Now for the non-Dark-type Pokemon on this graph, the only one, well, other than Mewtwo, we got Porygon Z. And Porygon Z is a very interesting Pokemon. In the main series games, when Gen 4 first came out, like OG console games, Porygon Z had like a ton of hype going with it. Because it was like, after its ability adaptability kicked in, its Hyper Beam could like OHKO certain things like super well. So it was like, man, this all-powerful glass cannon, revenge killer type Pokemon here. So I was kind of interested to see what happens with it in Pokemon Go. Overall, I feel like it's going to maintain its glass cannon status because its defenses are pretty flimsy. But Porygon Z is a normal type Pokemon. And this is a Shadow Ball Mewtwo raid. So I figured, you know, may as well check it out, see how he's doing there. Because in the Mewtwo raid with the Shadow Ball, even like Lick Snorlax is pretty dang reasonable, like in the grand scheme of things. There are worse things you could use than a Lick Hyper Beam Snorlax against Shadow Ball Mewtwo. So if that guy has swag, then I imagine Porygon Z would have something going for it. And yeah, apparently it does. This is using Hidden Power Dark. It could be Hidden Power Dark, Bug, Ghost, doesn't matter. It's all going to do the same damage. And I also included Shadow Ball. To be perfectly honest, if I were to like envision Porygon Z's moveset, I'd see it getting Dark Pulse before Shadow Ball. But this is all Dreamer kind of stuff to begin with. If there's one thing that Porygon Z needs to have for sure, it's going to be Hyper Beam. Because that's like its thing, you know, it's its legacy, it's having that deadly Hyper Beam. So, but yeah, this is using Shadow Ball. So yeah, and it looks like Porygon Z is doing pretty hot. Not the optimal moveset DPS of Honchkrow, but on the level of Weavile, and a little bit more tanky too. So I think that's pretty interesting there. Very powerful normal type Pokemon. Might give some honor to the normal type house in Gen 4. Oh yeah, and if you're curious, Tyranitar does have a breakpoint between 25 and 40. It's like 37 or something like that. And because I was belting through this graph quickly before coming here with you guys today, I just chose not to include it because I initially put up this graph and then I decided to throw in the 25. And I figured if I threw in the other breakpoint, it would just fill space here. Wouldn't be terribly interesting. I think we can infer that it would have a DPS level probably around 20, since those breakpoints do cause a like 1.5 kind of leap in DPS. And since I was on the topic of Mewtwo, had Mewtwo on the brain, and I was running Mewtwo simulations, I decided to look at Focus Blast Mewtwo, because we have a new bug type coming in, Yanmega. So let me pull up that graph for us here. Alright, so this is the Mewtwo raid with the Focus Blast. Confusion Focus Blast, great friends, no dodge. And of course we got the master here, Mewtwo. But we also have the DPS master over here, Gengar. Pretty interesting duality going on between them. I kind of like raids where there isn't that one clear defined like supremo option. When I say that, I mean like a Pokemon that's like here, you know, better DPS than the best DPS, and similar if not better tankiness than the best tankiness, you know. Even though it's nice to have that clear defined option, I like it when players kind of have a choice, you know, a reason to have variety. But yeah, this is a Shadow Claw Gengar, and this is a Sucker Punch one. With Great Friendship, I noticed that Sucker Punch and Hex were performing about the same, so I just included one. I went with Sucker Punch. It was like slightly better on DPS, like ever so slightly. I was like, alright, I'm just gonna go with Sucker Punch, so that's why I went with Sucker Punch. Hex is probably just as good. I haven't looked at the friendship specific breakpoints between Hex and Sucker Punch, so there might be something there, especially with Ultra Friendship, but this isn't an in-depth Mewtwo guide. No, we're talking about Gen 4 prediction kind of Pokemon, so let's get off that train. So yeah, what drew me to Yanmega was in the article the GamePress team is working on, they're talking about how Yanmega is going to be similar in performance to like Pinsir and Scizor, but it's going to be a bit tankier, and how that could make it better for certain raids. And I was like, well, what better raid to check out than the Focus Blast Mewtwo raid, am I right? And yeah, it's doing pretty cool here. You'll notice that there are some faces missing from this graph, most notably Lugia. And just making this graph very quickly, I just did a really hard cut on the DPS check. So Lugia will be an extremely tanky option for this particular fight, but lower than 16 DPS. Not that there's anything terribly wrong for that, especially with the EX raid where you're going to have a bunch of people all the time. But just for the sake of making this analysis like quick and easy, I decided to not go that low. But yeah, so Yanmega, pretty dang tanky. Definitely not as good as the premium Mewtwo. And of course doesn't have the ghost tier DPS going on. But compared to the other bug types, Pinsir and Scizor here, and I also included Scyther because Scyther gets the double resist, just like Yanmega does to the fighting type attacks, right? Yeah, it is doing a bit better than them. It's better DPS. Part of that can be attributed to the fact that it's surviving longer, so it's able to get off more charge moves reliably. And yeah, the moveset I used for Yanmega here was Bug Bite and Bug Buzz. I'm pretty convinced that Yanmega will get Bug Buzz. It's a very Yanmega kind of thing to have. As far as the fast move goes, I'm really not sure what they're going to do for it. Like, my crystal ball doesn't say much on that. But I just went with Bug Bite. Figured it was a safe option. So yeah, Yanmega's looking like a pretty powerful bug. I think Poke AK did some sort of video about how he's stocking up on Yanma candies because like Yanmega is one of his faves. So you should be happy to learn that Yanmega is looking pretty stellar for the Gen 4. Mismagius is one of my like older kind of faves. I just liked it because it evolved from Mischievous, and I really liked Mischievous when I was younger, so I was like, oh man, it's got an evolved form. And then Gen 4 is the generation where I was playing competitively for the first time ever, and I learned very quickly that wasn't that good, but I always appreciated Mismagius because it's, you know, it's cool looking. It's like this ghost witch thing, right? Yeah, so always a place in my heart for it, so I decided to run a sim on it. And as far as the name pronunciation, I don't know if it's Mismagius or Mismagius, so if you want to correct me, then you feel free to correct me. I did not look it up. I'm just gonna flip-flop between them and cover both my bases, right? But yeah, looking pretty good in the Focus Blast fight. It's got DPS and tankiness nearly identical to Rayquaza. Now, of course, this does suggest that Rayquaza is a better investment because this is just completely neutral with a single resistance. Rayquaza is just a total beast. But Mismagius, getting that immunity tier resistance to the Focus Blast and dealing super effective damage, you know, looking pretty cool. And if you're curious about the moveset, I used Hex because it doesn't learn Shadow Claw, and I gave it Shadow Ball because, you know, if a ghost type doesn't get Shadow Ball, then it's just not going to be a good ghost type, and that's just how this game works, right? So yeah, Mismagius looking pretty great there. And I've got Gardevoir down here, and yeah, Gardevoir is not looking as impressive anymore with its tankiness now that Yanmega's flying the skies. Another thing to note is that Gardevoir does look a little bit more impressive when it's up against, what's it called? Psycho Cut? Yeah, Psycho Cut Focus Blast is really the moveset that Gardevoir excels against as a tank option, but haven't looked too deep into the numbers on that. I imagine it has to do with a bulk point with Focus Blast since that hits so heavy, so sorry Gardevoir, your weird little niche against Focus Blast Mewtwo is kind of coming to a close. Thinking about Gardevoir, one Pokemon I didn't look at that I'm like, oh man, I could have ran a couple sims on it. Yeah, I didn't look at Togekiss, which is a flying fairy type Pokemon, evolves from Togetic. I'm not sure what they're going to do with the movesets. I'm kind of hoping that we're going to see our first ever fairy fast move with Fairy Wind, and I imagine it's going to get Air Slash because Air Slash is kind of Togekiss's legacy. It's what it's known for, at least in Gen 4 console games and Gen 5, and then I kind of fell out of competitive play, so I don't know what happened with Togekiss after that. But, so I'm pretty sure it's going to get Air Slash, and maybe Fairy Wind for a fast move. As far as the charge moves go, I'm pretty sure we can expect a flying type and a fairy type one. So that third one, the oddball, what could it be? Could it be Shadow Ball? If it was, that could be pretty cool for Togekiss, but I felt Shadow Ball and Togekiss was a little bit of a stretch, so I kind of passed it up, but I could have done something with it, so my apologies, guys. And down over here by Scyther, I decided to include Azelf, because I remember reading something on the Sylph Road, very briefly, like in the past week, that they were saying like, oh, Mewtwo might be power crept by Azelf. So I was like, that sounds kind of odd, because I feel like the Lake Trio is all pretty flimsy. And yeah, looking into it, Azelf doesn't look all that impressive. Yeah, this is using Confusion with Shadow Ball. And yeah, it doesn't really come anywhere near Mewtwo's level of power. Now this is against the Focus Blast raid. So it's a move, well, yeah, they have like the same advantage here, so. Yeah, sorry Azelf, not looking too hot. Even though the Lake Trio is pretty cool looking, I kind of like their style a little bit more than the Reggies. Sorry Reggies. But I feel like Niantic needs to like learn from the Reggie event here and try to make that not be as sucky with the Lake Trio. Because Lake Trio is like 3 Psychic type Pokemon. It's not even like 3 different types with the same kind of weaknesses. No, it's literally like the 3 same Pokemon. And with their like Go translated stats, they're all like basically the same, so it's kind of gross. Yeah, interesting what they're going to see with Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit, or Misprite. I don't know how to pronounce their names either, so pretty sure it's Azelf though. I got that one, and that's why he's on the graph, because I know how to pronounce him. So that was a clip from my live stream SwagTips. SwagTips streams every Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time on the Twitch channel SwagTips. If you got any questions on this content, feel free to comment below, let me know, and I'll try to help you out. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, well then make sure to subscribe to SwagTips.